Christopher Clarey is here to talk about his latest book, which comes out May 13th, called The Warrior, Rafael Nadal and His Kingdom of Clay. Chris, great to have you back, and especially at a moment that must be super special for you at the moment.
Yeah, it's been a five setter, definitely, to get this one out and about, and it's clay, so it's harder, right? You gotta earn the points. So no, but it feels good. It's been the early response has been terrific, really gratifying, and this one was an interesting challenge for me, both in terms of narrative and in terms of production. So it does feel great. Thank you.
Well, for those who are watching, you can see the book over Chris's left shoulder, and here I've got there it is. I got my copy here as well. I love the sort of the clay on the title as well is a cool look, and on your name on the front as well. I admitted to you earlier that I haven't gotten all the way through it yet, as my kids are keeping me quite occupied, but I can't wait, and my father, who's a big Nadal fan, can't wait to get it out of my hands as well. You mentioned that it's been a long time coming, that it's felt like five sets, and I know you mentioned to Ben and me months and months ago, even probably more than a year ago, that this was, the next thing that you were working on after the Federer book. What took so long to get this one out there? I know initially, if I'm not mistaken, it was going to come out before his retirement, but then that maybe changed things for you a bit.
Yeah, there were some family things that happened, and there also were some situations with just trying to figure out the best timing on it, and because it wasn't clear what his timeline was. The Federer book did come out in its first edition while Roger was still playing. He was kind of in a break as things turned out when it was released, and you can't really predict. I mean, a book timeline isn't like newspapers or the web. You just don't know how exactly things are going to play out in your window, and these things are put in place 6 months to a year ahead of time. So yeah, I just it was we knew it had to come out in May because the book is designed to be focused. It's Nadal's whole career is covered by this, and since his retirement, really the whole career is in there in different places. And Wimbledon 2008, the U.S. Open in 2010, 13, 19, all those things are in there. Australian Open, a mega match with Djokovic, but clay is the prism, and so it just logically has to come out in May. So when we didn't get it last May, we decided to get it out this year, and I think ultimately it makes it a better book. I mean, for sure, it has the complete story, and it has certainly benefited from me having that time to be able to do more research and do a little bit of polishing and grinding down some of the clay to make it smoother. But it feels good to get it done. But it was about a 2-year process, and ultimately, if you think about all the years covering him beforehand, I mean, I first met Nadal in Wimbledon in 2003, and Tony at the same day, his uncle. So that's 20-year process of covering him as a print journalist, and then 2 years of writing the book.
First time I saw him was 2005 in Montreal when he faced Agassi in the finals there. And I mean, I can't believe we're coming up on the 20th anniversary of that. It doesn't feel that long ago. To me, his career certainly flew by in some ways. Um, Tell me, who's the book for? Is it meant for hardcore Rafa junkies? Is it for those who just appreciated what he brought to the sport? Or is it really for any tennis fan that wants to learn more about one of the all-time greats that tennis has ever seen?
I hope it's got a wider reach. I hope it's got general tennis fans for sure, and general sports fans. And I think the thing that's different about the book from most sports biographies, and certainly any tennis biography that I've seen, is that it's it's focused on Rafa for sure, but there's also really a big thread, and many chapters about the French Open and clay. And so it talks a lot about sort of the history of the tournament because, to me, with 14 titles there, which is insane just to say, and no one would even have thought about it before. It wasn't just like, oh, it can't be done. No one was even talking about it being done, so it wasn't really a topic. So, but 14, I think the man and the place had just become one, really. And of course, he has 12 titles in Barcelona, and he has 11 in Monte Carlo, and he has 10 in Rome. So, not the only double-digit place, but Roland Garros is the major. It is the global reference, and rightfully, the most prestigious of them. And I think that'll be a feat we'll be talking about for decades. And I really wanted to, with my own connections to Paris and Roland Garros and all that, really bring those two together, unify them in a book, both in the structure of the book and also all my own research. And it was a big challenge, and that was part of the reason why it was harder than I would have imagined. But I think ultimately it sets the book apart. It'll be up to readers to judge whether it works, and I do think it also broadens the reach of the book because you're talking to people in this book and hearing from them like the man who makes the clay at Roland Garros, the man who's in the factory in the outskirts, who's sort of pounding it down into usable form. You're talking to the sculptor about the process of creating the statue that's in Roland Garros. So a lot of people that are behind the scenes or sort of involved with Nadal's legacy there that probably are a little bit off. You have Marc Maury, who does in French the great intro for Nadal at Roland Garros with when he goes through every year that he's won and has become kind of an internet sensation in France with the way he goes through each year and when he comes on court. So that's the part I really enjoyed, and I think that made it richer for me. And my experience, Mike, is that if you're having fun researching it and writing it, that's a good sign for your readers. If you're kind of going through the motions or it doesn't feel fresh to you, it's probably not going to feel fresh to your readers either.
Yeah, well said. I absolutely agree with that statement. Speaking of statements, here's a review from Kirkus Reviews. It says this insightful, wide ranging book could serve as a model for other sports biographers, an inspired portrait of an unusually dominant athlete. How does it make you feel to hear some of the reviews that have already come out and hear such positive comments about your work?
I mean, you're exposed, Mike. I mean, you do your thing. I mean, it's like anybody in any creative industry. You make your song and you put it out there. One, you hope people notice and listen. And two, you hope they like it. And three, you hope it has some kind of deeper meaning to them and maybe moves them in a different direction in their life in some small way. So that's kind of the hierarchy. So for sure, I've been really gratified because there's been really nice responses to the book. Put a lot into it and to get it out there. It's great to see that. But above all, I think what I like is and what means a lot is that this structure, like I was just telling you, is different. It's not the typical approach. It's not Rafa's born, Rafa rises, Rafa falls, Rafa comes back. It's much more of an interweaving of man and place. And it seems like, at least the early reviews, the reviewers like that and they find it fresh. So that really is probably the most gratifying. And of course, I want you to get through the book and really have a deep understanding of how the heck somebody can win 14 French Opens. I mean, it
Oh,
still boggles.
is that gonna explain it? Is that gonna give us the roadmap so I can get
I'm hoping that was my goal was that you have at least have a clue by the end, how that happens. It certainly is a preposterous concept from the start, but there's a lot of method to the madness.
I mean, it's funny at different points in my time as a tennis fan growing up, you see certain marks and you think, well, that'll never be hit again. You know, no one will get 109 titles like Jimmy Connors. You know, no one will get 15 Grand Slams and maybe pass Sampras. And to get 14 at one tournament, I know each generation says, well, there's the mark that will never be broken. But doesn't it feel almost pretty impossible for anyone to have the longevity, to have the good fortune? And he didn't even have good fortune with health, but to be able to be healthy enough or close to healthy enough to win 14 of those is just astounding, isn't it?
Yeah, I had a great interview I flashed back to, and it was my research of my own stuff that I had done over the years in sort of the mid '90s with Ili Nastase at Roland Garros. He was there, and we ended up doing a story. I think he was running for mayor of Bucharest at that point or something. And so maybe Nastase isn't the most reliable narrator, although he was Tony Nadal's childhood hero. And one of the reasons Tony Nadal gravitated to tennis. So Nastase and Nadal, it's not necessarily the easiest comparison, or certainly not a lot of apples to apples there. But Nastase said, nobody's beating Borg 6. Nobody's going to beat Borg 6.
Right.
It's like they shouldn't even try, basically. And so, if Nadal hadn't come along, he would have probably been right. But it's certainly 6 to 14 is just a quantum leap.
Like
But I think, obviously, not to cut you off, but I do feel like Rafa, as Emilio Sanchez Vicario says in the book, it's a perfect storm. And really, that's what ended up creating this phenomenal thing was this all the elements had to be right, had to come together, both technically, tactically, mentally, physically, all those things together. And that's what creates something crazy like 14.
let's talk about the elements coming together for you and delve into the writing process a little bit. And as a writer, never written a book before, but I'm certainly curious about what it takes to even undertake something like this, not just once, but twice now, with two big ones coming out in the past few years. Is taking on a project like this something that comes easily for you, or are there a lot of challenges and obstacles along the way as you go?
Now, I guess if you're a daily journalist, I don't know, you're a teacher, but so obviously you're used to dealing with words and books. But I feel like as a daily journalist, you can certainly live with stories for quite a chunk of time or live with beats that you're covering. Uh, but a book is a bit different because you don't really have a payoff. It's a long, long sort of downhill slope to get to the finish line, and it feels like an uphill slope sometimes too. So You have to really change your mental chip as a daily journalist when you're used to getting that daily or weekly sort of shot of adrenaline or feedback, be it negative or be it positive. There is a response, but when you're doing a book, you have to wait. You have to do it all, and then you have to sort of let it happen at a much different pace. And you, as you're in the key writing process, which can take several months or more, you are going to bed thinking about Nadal and Clay and Roland Garros, and you are waking up thinking about Nadal and Clay and Roland Garros. It's not an unpleasant thing, but it's just dominating your mind. And even if you think you're not there, you are. You're kind of trying to unlock the puzzles of the chapters you're trying to create. But I think you and I discussed this about the Master, the book on Federer, and I really feel like the structure is just so important. And I know you probably talk to your students about outlining and the importance of that, and ultimately it's just as important when you're writing a book. And I think you need to kind of probably like a movie script treatment when you need to get it all locked in where it's all going to play out. And maybe have some room for improv within. You really need to get your structure right and understand where your narrative's trying to go and kind of work through maybe half of those problems or more before you actually start writing the thing. And I think that's been helpful to me in both these books is to have a really good solid narrative structure outline. And when you have back and forth from Roland Garros to Nadal and from the Musketeers from the 1920s to Nadal in the 2010s, you got to figure out where everything's going to go. And because you are flashing in and out a lot, and you need to have obviously Nadal be the thread through everything in some way. But I think it was possible with this book to tell his whole career story through that lens, and that was both sort of daunting and really gratifying and rewarding to try to get it right.
Yeah, that word structure resonates with me because I do recall you mentioning that with the Federer book for sure. And I remember it kind of brought me back to my own high school days, thinking of, you're doing an English essay or a history essay, and if you just try to wing it, it's not going to end up with the mark that you want. And if you start early and you plan it, and you really, I used to have color coded cue cards and things like that for each
Yeah.
little area of the essay, and it sounds to me like it's sort of similar for you when you're writing a book like this, that it takes a whole lot of pre planning before you even put your first few words, out there on the keyboard.
Yeah, I talked to over 100 people for it. Obviously, it doesn't count all people I talked to over 20 years covering Nadal for the Times and the International Herald Tribune. But those 100 interviews, that sounds great, and it's good to do the research, but you ultimately got to find a way to use that in some form in the book. You can't possibly use all of it. So you are almost sort of either digitally post-it noting, interview with Emilio Sanchez, comment here, that goes in chapter 10. Talking to Francis Roig about Rafa's crisis in 2015-16, which was a really true crisis of anxiety and self-belief on the court. Find that to go in chapter 14 or whatever it was. But you're constantly kind of finding places to put things. And that's, it's a mental gymnastics, but also I think the right way to do it because you're always going to be, as you're researching, having new layers, new levels that you're reaching. And I think it's important to kind of keep the structure always kind of clear in your mind as you go through it.
Is the environment important to you when you're writing? Do you have a particular place that you like to sit? Does it have to be in the same spot or the same house? Do you have certain music or snacks, or what's the vibe for Christopher Clarey when he sits down and starts typing away?
I should have had like scraping feet for this one, right? Going across the clay.
Yeah.
I got to say, when the crunch time really hits, and even if you're writing long form and in a long book, you're going to have a crunch time. Then you kind of want to cocoon in one spot. Before that, it's good to graze in different places and do different things. That's a great question. But in my case, yeah, definitely instrumental music and a nice little place to tuck in at my home office, back north of Boston. So that's where, and some of it was written at our, my family place in San Diego too. But the real crunch time was up in the woods of New England, and that's a good place to be.
Any moments of writer's block where you feel like you've sort of hit a wall and stalled and you're trying to figure out a way to get around that?
I never really had that issue. I always say I never had the luxury of having that issue as a daily journalist. I mean, you have to do it. I mean, there are days when it comes easily and days when everything seems to come together and you get from the beginning of something to the end quite smoothly. And then other days when you're struggling and you're sort of cutting and pasting and figuring. But I just have always felt like, it's something when you've done so much of it, writing thousands and thousands of newspaper articles. I mean, a book is a different animal, but I don't think I've ever felt like I couldn't produce something. But sure, there are times when one of the big things here was initially this book, it's got 20 chapters. And initially, I had the chapter on clay very, very early in the book. It was maybe the second chapter, and it goes really deep on clay. Mike, maybe too deep, but I got really interested in it. And how the heck it started in France on the beaches of Normandy and Brittany, and how how the game developed on clay, and sort of the process of actually making a clay court, where it comes from, all these different things. It's very in depth, and I was learning a lot, so I was excited about it. And we talked it over with the publishers, and they felt, it's a great chapter, needs to be in the book, but I think it comes too early. It takes you too far from Nadal too early.
Right.
And I think they were right. And I think that might have, if we'd tried to publish a year ago, that might have been a different spot. So, but I think now the way it's structured, you really get into Nadal's psyche and Nadal's base foundation before you get to the literal physical foundation of clay court tennis.
Well, hey, I'm a week or two away from stepping back on the red clay of my local club here in Etobicoke, so maybe this will be the primer I need to refocus my game for that surface in particular. I'll take any help I can get. Um, what were some of the differences in putting this one together compared to the Federer book? I know the Federer book was really based on the places that were sort of important to him in his journey throughout his career and even before that. How about this one on Nadal? Because it is a different sort of format and way that you've put it together.
Yeah, I didn't want to do it in anything that was remotely similar, because I felt like if I did that, it would just be kind of the same task repeated with just changing the names, or the order, with Nadal being at the center instead of on the outside. So I think that was another reason why this structure works, because it allowed it to be different enough that it feels like a very, very different exercise, having it be about the place and the substance of Nadal. And also, they're just very different cats, very different people. So that also helped in a lot of ways to, I mean, Nadal is so anchored in Mallorca, so anchored in that part of Spain, has a lot of mostly the same people around him, or at least people that were in that sort of circle from an early age. He replaced ultimately Tony Nadal with Carlos Moya. I mean, Moya was as much a part of his teen years as anybody, as a mentor and a hitting partner, and when coming off number one. So that part is very different. Roger is certainly more cosmopolitan in his approach. He does have some people who've been around a long time. Pierre Paganini his trainer, was certainly a huge part of his life for a long time. Severin Luthi was a friend, and then became his longtime sort of assistant coach and coach. But a lot of the other people and characters changed along the way, and Roger's own life changed a lot with the base in Dubai, and kind of his very global nature. And I think also, Roger really, really changed a lot in his comportment on the court, from a hothead and somebody who struggled to handle his limitations, and really so frustrated so much of the time, and was able to find a calmer place. And Nadal, although he did learn the rituals and find a way to slow his game down when he was very young, in order to keep himself from giving up too much energy too fast, and actually playing too fast between the points. That was a way to slow him down. That's how it happened. He ultimately, I think, had a very similar demeanor and similar approach. He wasn't throwing his racket at 15 any more than he was at 35. So that also was something different about it. But ultimately, the structure of the book is what really separates them. And there is a little bit of overlap here and there. I mean, we talk about Federer and Nadal's rivalry in both books. Uh, I probably went deeper on it in the first book than I do in this one, and I really lean more into Nadal Djokovic, which to me is ultimately probably the greatest rivalry, not just the longest of the Open era on the men's side. So,
Well, we'll make sure we share that fact with the Djokovic fans so that they're buying up some copies too. Then.
but I don't know what you think, but I do feel like you look at just 60 matches, 31-29. They played at all four majors. They even played in Davis Cup. I mean, they played at the Olympics. Obviously, it's just they kind of met everywhere it mattered, and there were some real classics there. Even a couple at the French Open, which was hard to do. Rafa only played, 3 5-setters in his whole career at Roland Garros. I asked you this question in our last discussion. You got all three, but you remember the three?
I know right now I got to tell you these days with the kids and everything. If I can remember what I did yesterday, it's a miracle.
There's one Canadian, Felix Auger-Aliassime,
Right.
and then you got John Isner, and then you got Djokovic, of course, which is kind of amazing. You think about it. Rafa played 18 times at the French Open, and only 3 5-setters on a surface that lends itself to marathon play. It's an amazing stat.
I mean, when you say that, it gets me excited again about what Felix can still accomplish in his career.
Yeah.
And certainly, he's got lots of years ahead. But we'll save the Canadian tennis talk for the next time you're back. I want to, wrap up with a few more here. And you talk about the differences between the Federer book and the Nadal book. What about the differences in what your relationship was like with both of them from your vantage point in the press gallery over the years? I mean, you covered both of them from the start of their career right up until the end. You've written these two books now about both of them. What kind of rapport did you have with these two legends in the press room and in the conversations you had with them over the years?
Yeah, I had the good fortune, journalistically, to meet them both very young, both in their late teens and, 17 for Nadal, probably 18 for Federer. And so just that was a real, a real boon to be able to have that look at them all the way through from there. And I had a lot of, I lived in Spain for 8 years. I lived in southern Spain, and I had just left when Nadal emerged, but I was very, uh, immersed in Spanish tennis at that point. I'd covered a lot of Sergi Bruguera, covered a lot of Moya, covered a lot of Alex Corretio, Albert Costa, those kind of players, and Conchita Martinez. I'd spent quite a bit of time with, and Arancha, covered her. So I really was in the Spanish tennis bubble a lot from living there and just the timing that I had on the circuit. So I think it helped me understand how much of an outlier Nadal was and what he was going to mean to Spanish tennis. And then being at the first, Davis Cup title for him, 2004 in Seville, where I had lived for these 8 years, kind of a cold night when he played Roddick in the second match, and just sort of was the first massive clue that this was going to be, a potential world beater of a player. I mean, he had beaten Albert Costa, at Monte Carlo, so that wasn't a bad win at all. But this was huge pressure, expectation. They pulled Ferrero out of the lineup, with all his experience, and putting it all in place. So there was obviously huge belief from within the team.
Now,
So to be there for the
they clearly knew what they were getting into putting
yeah,
him out there.
but you never really know. You just never know until you're put in that. They had suspicions he played well in Davis Cup already that year, but that was key. And then just to be at the French Opens in those early years, and at the Wimbledons when he and Federer built their legacy of a rivalry, and to just physically been in all those spots. And then because my Spanish was better in those days, I'm still hanging in there by a thread, but my French has always been my strength in my languages that I speak besides English. But Spanish is functional, and it definitely helped with Nadal to be able to speak Spanish with him. He was much more at ease that way. I think it opened the doors that he felt like I understood him on a better level as a journalist, and helped build that rapport. And and I always felt like Rafa in Spanish was a very different experience than listening to him in English.
I'm sure. I
Much
mean,
more.
it took him a while to get up to speed, understandably so. And of course, you're going to be able to communicate your thoughts so much more clearly in your native tongue.
Yeah, there's a whole chapter in here about language, and talk about, Nadal and connection to Mallorquí, and obviously from Mallorca, which is basically very similar to Catalan. And then you have, Spanish language, obviously, and then the French, because the tournament is Rafa's tournament in many ways, and his French was decent, but he never really progressed past a certain point. It didn't seem like, and his English certainly improved immensely. But in those early years, he was, within his team. They were joking with him a lot, and he was kind of fighting back and saying, "Watch out! I'm going to stop speaking English. I'm going to speak Spanish if you don't stop at my press conference." But I just ultimately, um, I think those who heard him in Spanish would have a much deeper understanding of his philosophy, of his yeah, his gravitas, his maturity. And I was always very impressed with how he conducted himself. But in English, he can be for a long time, he was a bit of a caricature, I think, in terms of how he was perceived. Him, I think people liked him and took value in what he had to say, but
Somewhat
it was
limited.
never it never flowed. So I
Mm.
think that was a big advantage. And also with Federer, don't speak Swiss German, but speaking French, being able to see him in that context. And obviously Rogers, obviously very comfortable in English. It was, I think, the first language he spoke.
I mean, listen, when Roger was in Toronto or Montreal and I was covering the event, when the English questions ended, and there were always way more English journalists in there, and they reserved some for the French journalists, and I'm bilingual, I grew up in Montreal. I was thrilled. I'm like, great, I can use my French here. And I remember I put my hand up for the first time, and the press person said, "Oh no, it's seulement français, only in French." And I'm like, "No, no, je suis capable. I could do this." So, yeah, you make use of those extra languages. I'm sure you did too over your career with both of them.
Yeah, it really helped. I think it really did. I mean, I would love to have spoken Swiss German. That would have been probably the ultimate to have had that language too. But Yeah, I think that was a real window, and things are changing. I mean, with AI and translation and maybe still face to face, it's a huge thing. But in terms of what you can glean and pick up for a long time, I mean, if you wanted to read L'Equipe with the marvelous French sports paper, you had to speak French, and really, there was not going to be any digital translation of that unless somebody did it for you bit by bit. So it gave you a big edge in time, a big edge in perspective, and allowed you to see things more in the round. And I think that's one of the many reasons I really wanted to do this book, Mike, was I felt like, if I have enough points of reference for myself, that tells me I should do it. And, I have the time in Spain, the time in France. I'm still very connected there. My wife is French. I lived in my early years of my marriage a few blocks from Roland Garros. It's the tournament that I know the best. Well, and I've covered a lot of sports. And I had this amazing, to the Times and Herald Tribune, access to Fed and Nadal through big chunks of their careers. And so I just felt like if I didn't do it, I would be kicking myself. And so that's a good reason to do a book, because you really feel like you have something you want to share that maybe you only they all together globally, only you could put together that way, quite that way.
Well,
I mean, people.
you're the perfect guy to write this one for sure. And I know it's just coming out now, so this next question might seem a little bit soon, but I'm going to ask it anyways. Is the mind already turning in terms of what the next project or perhaps next book might be for you down the road?
Yeah, we're talking about that. The way this book process works is you have the generation of the idea and the acceptance of the idea from the publishers. Then you have the actual creation and writing of it. And then this phase that, you and we're talking here and good conversation. And this is a big part of it, being able to promote your work, talk to people, and it's pretty consuming. So I'm going to put my full focus on that. But of course, I mean, I've changed my chip. I'm writing books down, and obviously got my newsletter on Substack, but the books are the thing that really my priority in my career. And so I'm, of course, thinking about it, and we'll see what comes up.
Well, I'm going to dive into this one, and when I'm done, or when my father's done, anyways, then it's going to go right on the bookshelf next to the Master. But for now, the Warrior, Rafael Nadal, and his Kingdom of Clay. Can't wait to get into this. Very excited for you to hear more favorable reviews and reaction from your readers who are incredibly loyal to your work over the years as well. So we wish you all the best. Thanks for stopping by and making us one of your press stops here to promote it. And we look forward to having you back on again soon, Chris, to just chat normal day-to-day tennis and what's going on in the men's and women's game, which we always enjoy as well.
Yeah, Mike, I'm a big fan of your guys' work, and I wish you well with it. I'll be at Roland Garros and Wimbledon. Anybody from listening to this who can get a hold of me, I'd love to sign books or meet up. And I was also wanted to say that there'll be an edition coming out in Quebec later this year in French, and they're working on that now. And they did a lovely job with the master edition that came out there. So that'll be coming up north as well.
Ah, c'est parfait. Okay, Chris, à bientôt. Thanks again. Merci.
Merci beaucoup. Ciao, Mike.
Thank you guys so much for watching us at Matchpoint Canada. If you like our work, follow along, hit the subscribe button below.